Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Peter Llewellyn. For those of you who don't know me, I run the services in and around MedComms networking.com. These services provide support, information, and so on for people who work in and around the global MedComms community, by which I mean medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on. Lots of meetings, lots of online information, and so on, but we're also running these Zoom webinars as a way of engaging more people from further afield. And delighted to say we can involve speakers, panelists, and so on also, without us all having to get together in one place. We can sit where we are, we can join in with a meeting, and then go back to work. So today, very happy to have Tim Sparke and Faisal Ahmed with us today. We're going to be talking about nurturing a digital mindset. And I'm going to start by simply handing over to Tim and asking him to start with the presentation. We're then going to have a Q&A. So to start off with Tim, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. And thanks everyone for joining. We've got quite a lot to talk you through today. And it's really nice. We basically get sort of 15 minutes to talk through some key ideas that Faisal and I have been working on in our sort of work in sort of digital transformation and building digital cultures over the last few years, and specifically some of the work we've done in MedComms and pharmaceutical marketing as well. So I founded a digital transformation practice called Congregation Partners around 10 years ago, and it was in response to sort of a lot of quick fix solutions when it came to trying to get over digital with let's get a new head of digital, or let's do some digital training. And we basically sort of took a more holistic approach to looking at talent and thought about let's understand the business case. Let's start to think about who we've got in the business, what skills do we need to develop, what knowledge do we need to develop, and do we need to acquire some people, or do we need to sort of run some training? So quite a holistic approach to talent. And 2 years ago, we were introduced to Faisal on the basis of we were pitching for a pharmaceutical client, and we met Faisal, and we've ended up working on a huge sort of digital transformation program for them over the last 2 years, and Faisal helped introduce me to the weird and wonderful world of pharmaceutical and medical communications. Faisal, would you like to just say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've done a couple of these webinars before, and we've actually did a podcast many years ago in Oxford with Peter as well. So I've been in pharmaceutical marketing for about agency side for about 8 years. I've written a couple of books about it as well. We run a podcast called Digitally Sick. So I work with Tim, but I also work with WPP Health and Sudda as head of innovation as well, a couple of days a week.
Brilliant, thank you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take you through some of our thoughts on what works and what doesn't when it comes to nurturing a digital mindset. And then we'll get to the really rich part, which is where you get to ask us questions, and we can talk through sort of specific case studies and examples of what we've been working on ourselves. So as a business, there's four main things we do, which is training people, recruiting people, building more effective teams, and partnering. And the idea, I suppose, is that if you look at these four areas, then you have a really good chance of building future-facing, effective comms and marketing teams. Because everyone thinks, when it comes to sort of a digital world and digital mindsets, it's all about technology. In reality, we find it's not. Building teams, thinking about culture, thinking about process and structures is almost as important. And then when it comes to partnering, we used to just automatically get ahead of mobile or get ahead of social in as soon as these new opportunities emerged. But actually we find now there's so many opportunities out there, it's not effective to bring people in all the time. It's working out how you can build an ecosystem of collaborators and partners that you can work with that can amplify and build and expand on the effect you already have. In terms of our clients, we have worked for some of the oldest, most established businesses in the world, like Unilever, Amex, and the V&A. We also work with some new tech companies like Google and sort of Vodafone. We work with some sort of fast growth startups like Bulb, which is the fastest growing clean energy company in Europe at the moment. And as I say, we've just started in the last 3 or 4 years working with GSK and more recently with Gilead Science as well. So basically, the premise of the session and what we sort of talk about a lot is this idea that you know, technology is developing faster than our ability to adapt. So if you see the sort of pink line at the bottom, technology's progress and development is exponential, growing faster and faster every day. Our ability as humans to adapt is pretty much continuing at the same pace it has done for hundreds of years. And your ability to sort of learn faster than your competition, we see as a critical sort of sustainable competitive advantage. And one of my favorite quotes by an anthropologist called E.O. Wilson is, we have Neanderthal minds, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And this sort of summarizes some of the issues we face. We're still quite basic, sort of cave-like creatures, but we work in fairly hierarchical medieval institutions, but we've also got this amazing technology that can hopefully take us to incredible places. So some of the trends that are driving the transformation, specifically in pharma, digital literacy amongst patients is obviously increasing exponentially, and Faisal has lots of stories about sort of millennials and how happy they are to be diagnosed by chatbots. Digitally empowered sort of healthcare professionals, so it's not just patients, it's also HCPs and healthcare professionals who are becoming more and more digitally savvy. Sort of digital treatment, sort of management, so how we're using digital technologies to allow them to better manage their own treatment and adherence, digital therapeutics, so again, developing that in terms of sort of more tech startup-y sort of behaviors, and then sort of digital product management. So pharma and healthcare organizations moving into creating products and services as well as drugs and things like that, which are allowing them to be a lot more sort of customer-centric than they were historically. So there's some of the big trends driving some of the changes that we're thinking about. But I think the most important one for us as both consumers and people, and also sort of comms and marketing professionals, is the reality is we all want to interact with customers, companies that give us a positive experiences, and we tend to avoid those that don't. So companies that are active where we're looking, where we are, and where we're interested, we're going to engage with. Companies that don't exist there or they're hard to get hold of are going to be less compelling to us in the future. And this is why sort of multi-channel digital communications is so important for all of us working in communications today. In terms of the areas we need to think about transforming, so obviously communications. So the whole comms process from start to finish is going to be transformed. In terms of content, there's three trends. So sort of HCPs are having more distanced relationships with pharmaceutical and healthcare companies. There's changes to how that content's managed internally. There's changes in the pace of development and how quickly we need to get approval for those sort of bits of content. So there's lots of areas around, you know, sort of the creation and the distribution of content that are big challenges for all of us. When it comes to data, obviously we know data's been massively overhyped as a potential, well, I mean, there's a lot of interest in it, but a lot of that interest has been overhyped, and now there's lots of crises and scandals around sort of data leakage and things like that. But, you know, it's going to become a core skill for most of your clients and most companies in terms of hoovering up the right data, making sense of it, being secure with it, and making sure that you're ethical with the way you treat it. And then once you've done that, sort of turn that information into insights. And then one of the sort of often ignored areas in terms of transformation is this idea of culture. So we'll say this repeatedly, but it's just not all about technology. It's about people, and it's about how we develop people, how they work together, how we build capabilities, how we build a sense of community, how we build a sense of purpose, and sort of help people develop a mindset, which is, if we look at the mindsets of digitally native companies, they tend to be quite open, quite collaborative, quite experimental. How do we sort of develop those mindsets in quite sort of strict and hierarchical situations? Obviously, it's about diversity, not just sort of ethnic diversity, but social, economic, and sort of background diversity. And then how can we start to think about building a more innovative culture? And so some of the things that we've learned that I'd like to take you through is, you know, we live in an industry and we work in an industry which is obsessed with jargon and technology, and especially if you work in sort of tech, these sort of languages, these words will be things that are bandied around and used all the time. And the reality is sorry, I see that slide's not formatted quite right, but a lot of this jargon is designed to alienate us and make us feel slightly deficient and not particularly sort of, you know, wanting to engage with technology, digital services and things like that. And that's the point. A lot of these ad servers of these sort of tech companies, they try and make things seem incredibly complicated so that you are then, you know, forced into buying the wrong solution or buying something that's inappropriate. And I think this confusion around language and technology is one of the biggest barriers that we face when it comes to sort of developing more effective digital cultures. So one of the first things is obviously beware consultants using jargon and bearing digital transformation gifts. So there's people who come to you and sort of start using lots of language and start to say, this is, you know, I don't know, whatever it happens to be, start talking about blockchain in meetings or artificial intelligence and things like that. Just be wary of them at any point, because that can be quite a challenge. We do need to sort of keep an eye on that sort of things. Anyone who makes this stuff appear simple, as if you just sign everyone up to Slack or start using some new digital service that's going to solve all your comms and cultural issues, that's not true. So we know that's an issue that you're going to have to face. And for me, a big pushback for any sort of you know, agency or client is if someone can't explain something simply, they probably don't understand it well enough. We tend to push back and rely on jargon when we're not entirely clear about what we're talking about. And if you just develop the confidence to be able to push back and say, what do you mean? Why would we do that? Why is this important for my audience? Why, you know, and just challenge and actually just say, sorry, I'm not entirely clear on what you're talking about. Many years ago, I used to work for Apple, and I was the product specialist on one of their audio products, and people had come in and they'd talk to me using this incredibly sort of complex language about problems they were having. And it was only after about 3 months working there, I started to realize the more complicated they made it sound, the less they probably understood what was going on. And a bit of like gentle prodding and just asking some fairly simple questions could often unearth some fairly sort of simple ideas of what was going wrong or what was happening. So one of my favorite quotes from Einstein there. I think one of the important things is this idea of creating a shared common language amongst you and your team. Digital in itself, if you ask 10 people what digital as a word means, they'd have 10 different definitions, and some of them would talk about advertising technologies, some of them would talk about the internet, some of them would talk about, you know, sort of Google or whatever it happens to be, and you would realize that these terms are in many ways not that helpful. So the closer we can get to creating a sort of a simple jargon-free way of talking, creating a shared common language where I agree, if we're going to talk about email marketing, we're going to talk about CRM or whatever it happens to be, but just agreeing that sort of common language we think is really important. And there's one of my favorite mistranslations from Google Translate. Do not walk in the grass, ends up being tiny grass is dreaming. For me, it's really important to start thinking about setting a sort of compelling vision for change. So once you've got the common language, then what's your North Star? What are you going for? But don't obsess with this sort of my second Trojan horse reference today. But, you know, so we often talk about sort of a big Trojan horse, a big strategy that's going to solve our problems. But yes, we need a clear sort of vision for change, but actually think about what are the small things we can do to bring that change around. And we often talk about Trojan mice as a really interesting way of sort of changing companies. So it's not always about the big 5-year strategy that makes the difference. It's thinking about those little behavior changes, those habits that you can build within the team. They can make a huge difference when it comes to supporting and driving change. A lot of companies' default response is to hire a messiah. So that's when we get a new head of digital, or we get a head of innovation or something like that. That may well be part of your solution, but don't expect them to solve all your problems, because actually if you do hire someone like that, they tend to, you know, everyone outsources their thinking to this new person. The rest of the team don't necessarily engage, and there's too much expectation put on this new person, and they may not even be capable of making that change, because there's a huge requirement for chief digital officers and heads of digital in every company, and not many of them have had the effect that you'd want them to have. Again, a tempting thing is to think, let's start up by setting up a multi-channel or digital department. Again, that can be a good sort of step, but you need to set time limits on it. If you say we're going to do this because it's something we need to do for 12 months, but we want to, ultimately our goal wants to be to create, make sure everyone's got a digital voice, digital opinion, digital experience, then that's a far stronger way of working than setting up a digital division where people will just say, if anyone mentions the internet or something technical, they just say, oh, you know, need to go and speak to so-and-so over there. We think that's a really bad way of sort of moving, and actually just creates more silos that can create further problems further down the line. Again, don't try and tackle everything at once. So there's huge sort of areas that companies can transform when it comes to sort of the way we create the marketing and the communications that we can create, the way we work internally, the way we store data, the way we track ideas and how they sort of how conversations and ideas happen and move around the business. All of those are very specific issues. So we need to think about where are we going to focus our efforts, and just think about small steps that you can take to actually start to shift behaviors. And for me, it all starts with people, behaviors and mindsets. A huge part of a digital culture is sort of this idea of just less talk and more action. So actually sort of getting to make ideas. One of the problems of agency life that I found when I was working in digital marketing was, excuse me, this sort of huge amount of time writing strategy docs and creating great ideas, when actually if you just got a couple of developers or a web developer and just created something, create a wireframe or a prototype of it and showed it to some people, you could avoid 6 months worth of sort of dead alleys and sort of blind corners that you can end up in. So this idea of prototyping, making stuff early is critical, and encouraging that making culture we think is super important. And this is Phil McKinney talks about, you know, when it comes to innovation, an ounce of execution is worth more than a ton of theory. This is a very sort of interesting sort of new approach, where the 20th century approach was all about long-term strategies and thinking about big plans and sort of six-year sort of product roadmaps, which are still really important in pharmaceuticals. But on the right, we have this idea of VUCA. So the idea that we live in a VUCA world now. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex and ambiguous, makes these long-term strategies quite tricky. And it's VUCA, as we know, in terms of society, in terms of politics, in terms of everything at the moment. But actually, in a business sense, we're seeing this as well. Who knows what consumer behaviors are going to be, you know, most prevalent in 6 or 12 months' time, let alone sort of 5 years' time. There's an obsession with innovation within our industry for many different reasons. And on the left is an old Onion article from, I think it was around 2004, when they sort of said something about Gillette, and they said, right, we're doing 5 blades. And then of course, like 3 years later, Gillette came out with a 5-blade razor, which was the logical conclusion of their sort of product direction. But there is an obsession with innovation, and we think often what we call innovation theatre, which is innovation for its sake or for PR, rather than thinking about innovation in terms of process or structure or how we can work. And a lot of what we've done with the clients we've worked with in pharmaceuticals has been innovation with compliance, with legal affairs and teams like that, of how can we speed up the process so we can actually get our ideas out there faster. And when we think about sort of our output and what we can make, some of you may have seen this. This is the Gartner hype cycle, and the Gartner hype cycle tracks every technology over a sort of period, and most technologies when they're launched will go through a period of inflated expectations. They'll be followed up by a trough of disillusionment, which is, you know, sort of you've got overhype, and then you have the reaction against the overhype when the Daily Mail writes an article saying, you know, Snapchat's the end of youth as we know it. And then some technologies die off at that point. Some of them move through to the slope of enlightenment, and then some move through to the plateau of productivity, where it just is, and it just becomes, you know, the new normal. So things that sit on the plateau of productivity now would be things like email, Zoom that we're on today, Skype, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those things. They're not the most hypey technologies in the world, although some of them in pharma terms are quite hypey. But I think as an industry, we often obsess with what's at the peak at the moment. So in terms of peak stuff, we'd be thinking about probably artificial intelligence, in terms of blockchain, AR and VR may be up there, TikTok, The new musical app from China is very sort of, lots of clients are asking about this at the moment. So it's just be aware of the fact that if you're doing stuff over on the left in terms of comms, you're probably doing it for PR and fame. If you're doing it on the right, you're going to do it for mass effect and to have real impact. And we think it's really important, just think about sort of developing this change team across the business. So don't just have a digital department, just empower, find your big champions, find the really important people who are already doing this stuff, and then empower them and sort of give them the capacity for change. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about sort of small things you can do, Trojan mice and things like that we think is quite interesting. One of the ideas we used at Unilever was this idea about bright sparks. And this comes from a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. And again, they talk about sort of making change happen and how you can do that consistently. And they say usually change doesn't come from a big initiative, and it often doesn't come from outside the business. Often it comes from looking at the business and finding those people who are already doing it. So you've got people probably on your team or in the place who are already tinkering around the edges and trying sort of various different experiments. And what we want to do is shine a light on those people and really start to amplify their effect and build stories around them, champion them, and get them to try and sort of model the effect they've had and get other people to model that after that. And sometimes we call those people sort of positive deviants. So they're breaking the rules, but they're doing it for the right way. So it's this idea of how can we sort of build those stories around those bright sparks, those bright spots in the business that are already sort of doing the new behaviors that we want to start modeling. For me, we often think it's really complicated, this idea of sort of transformation and a world of constant change. But the reality is, in our experience, it's just really hard. It's not super complicated. It's just a question of deciding what you're going to execute and then repeatedly doing it, even when it doesn't go well, and even when we have to do sort of further work to back it up. So I think this is an important thing of, it's not rocket science, a lot of this stuff, but it is really hard to consistently do over a period. And if you look at sort of the digitally native companies that have been doing that, then, and you look at Amazon and their approach, they just, you know, they have a 20-year strategy that they just execute again consistently. And, you know, they had 10 years of making a huge loss, and then they start to move through to profit. And I think that resilience and that sort of approach is incredibly powerful in many respects. And coming back to the first point, this is the second last slide. It's just, you know, people think this is all about technology, 90% technology and 10% people. And we think it's not that at all. Technology is a really important enabler. It's a new enabler of new ways of communication, of new channels, of new sort of abilities to communicate and collaborate. But this is about people. It's about changing people. It's about helping people cope with change, which is another huge thing. I mean, everyone says they like change and they enjoy change. No one likes change. As creatures, we're not designed to like change. So I think it's just, you know, it's thinking about our people, who works with us, who works for us, and how we can bring them on the journey and just make it as exciting and welcoming as possible. Encouraging that sense of curiosity, getting people really sort of engaged with the whole process. And we think that's a really good way of approaching these things. And I think one of the important final points is this idea that change can seem really scary, you know, especially when technology is shifting this fast. The dialogue moves to becoming about do or die, disrupt yourself before someone else does, or don't become a dinosaur, all of these sort of things, which we think is incredibly unhelpful language. I think, you know, there's a huge opportunity at the moment. It's a challenging time to work in communications, but there's never been more opportunities for us, and there's never been more opportunities to do new, interesting work. And so for us, it's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for evolution, and not a sort of you know, a negative aspect of the way we look at change. So thank you very much for your attention. That's Faisal and I, our contact details. I realize I haven't let Faisal talk much, but during the questions we will come back and hear from him lots more. I shall stop sharing the screen now and we will open it up.
Fantastic, thanks. Thank you very much, Tim. That was excellent. Really, I think, thought-provoking talk, comprehensive. And so just as we're starting the Q&A, and as you say, bringing Faisal into this, but to those of you watching this online at the moment, just to remind you, at the bottom of your screen, you've got a Q&A button and a chat button. Both of them will call up a text box. You can text in your questions, observations and comments. Basically what we'd like to do is be led by you guys. What do you want to know? Having said that, I'd like to just ask, I've got a number of soapboxes and I'm going to try not to rant and rave about some of this stuff. Again, the audience, please stop me by asking your own questions. But a number of the things you said during that, I noted down at one point you were talking about technology being used to enable people and all the rest of it. I think as someone who got quite excited about this 20 years ago, and I feel like I have some understanding of this, and as I said, a bit excited, maybe not a messiah as such, but I have been certainly excited about this stuff. One of the things that surprised me, upset me, disappointed me, frustrated me, is how much people have used the technology, which is so enabling, in order to build barriers and cause problems. So, to take a very simple example, but I could go on about it, I know I won't, take email, and the people now who insist on only communicating by email, they won't give you a phone number, you look at, but then they just ignore the emails because they don't want to talk to you, maybe with good reason. But the technology, is remarkable how technology has become a barrier to people communicating. And I find that interesting. And I just wonder whether you have an observation on that, or whether I'm just an old grumpy git sort of thing. Either of you, Faisal. Well, let's just start with Faisal.
It's a mixture of both, isn't it? I think, Pete. I mean, it depends on the company, to be honest. If you look at, it's quite funny because at Amazon, when we launched, we didn't have enough people to answer the telephones, and obviously email was quicker, so the telephone number was quite hidden. But if you look at Amazon services now, you've got video chat with customers, you've got chatbot chat with customer services, you can phone a number, you can text them. So they've got everything available now. So I think it's just down to the company, but they should be thinking customer first and what other tools they can use, to enable that.
But my point is, it's further than that, because it's the individuals then that have to do something, and the company can put all up sorts of processes, or you can email us, you can do this, but an individual needs to respond. And there are definitely, in my experience, I would say there are people who go, yeah, no, I respond to an email, even if it's to say no, and there are others who just go, it's great because I don't have to worry. I was reading something the other day and I got quite upset about it, but I've heard this sort of thing before. Somebody saying, I'm inundated with emails. What I do every morning is I go in and I delete everything on the basis that if it was important, someone's going to come back to me later on in the day. And I think that actually is quite, I don't know, does he really? But that's quite extreme, but and we've all been tempted, but actually, it wouldn't surprise me if some people do that. And I just think that's using technology wrong. They think they're using the digital technology to control and make their life better, or control what they're doing. But actually, it's just fundamentally wrong. And it's an individual there. It's not a company saying what they do. Anyway, okay, I'll stop ranting. I
delete emails in the morning as well. And we've done some really good work and seen some really good results on if you're communicating with HCPs, when the best time to send an email to them is. And obviously the key stat is a lot of them want it personalized, which we don't do, which is a bit wrong. But a key thing worked quite well is emailing 9 to 9:30, because they've deleted all their emails like you've just done. And then you just pop up right at the top. And there's some couple of cool tools out there. So if you Google, for example, if you Google email grader, that grades your email and lets you know what the open rate might be of that email. But a lot of it is just down to personalization, because those emails aren't personalized, you just delete.
Exactly. Or going, and again, and personalization is fine up to a point, but you don't know if you've got an email list, where these people are and what time zone they're in and all those sorts of things. Or then the next stage is people start setting up autoresponders, because that's using technology, isn't it? Let's let people know that I can't respond to this immediately. So I send 2,500 emails on a Tuesday and I get a bunch of emails back. I'm out for the afternoon, I'm on training, so I won't be able to respond to you immediately, or I don't work on Tuesdays, or you just go, well, if everyone stopped using autoresponders and actually just responded reliably in a reasonable amount of time,
Yeah.
we'd lose half the traffic. We'd all be a lot happier. Anyway, okay, I'm going off on one. We've started to get some comments coming in. So let's pick up on a couple of these things. I don't know. I mean, some of this is going to be a bit difficult, but let's just take a couple of them. You may or may not be able to answer this sort of thing, but I think several people are probably asking the same sort of question in terms of, let's follow that first one. What have been the most successful digital initiatives you've seen in pharma? So it's probably difficult to answer that very specifically, but can we get a feel for some of what you've seen that works well within and around the pharma space? Tim, starting with you.
Or Faisal, do you want to?
Faisal, you're in the middle of it, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. There's a few things that. There's things that have launched that actually, what's happened is that the clients left or the marketing managers left, and some people have just closed it down. So there was a good thing by Kygate at GSK for respiratory, for asthma, and it was a machine learning app. It launched a few years ago. It had really good success. It was measuring people. That was a really good app. It's quite hard. There was a really nice thing from Cannes this year, which was I think it was a COPD app, which actually was GSK again, from GSK in China, which was really interesting. I think the best thing I've actually seen is and everyone should Google this, is an IKEA case study. It's not pharma, but there's an IKEA case study called Disabilities, where they 3D printed add-ons to IKEA furniture to help people with disabilities. That's the loveliest thing I've seen, I think.
Okay. I mean, one of the problems, which is an obvious one, but I certainly feel it very strongly, I know you're a bit more in the middle of it than I am, is there's obviously lots of digital type stuff going on out there. Some of us might be a bit cynical about what's going on, but we don't really know, because a lot of this stuff is quite tailored to individual groups and audiences. And unless you're actually in the middle of a pot, or they go for an award or something, it's quite difficult. It's not like, judging ads that are in all the national newspapers or something like that. Some of this is quite hidden away, isn't it? There's one here somewhere. I mean, again, I think it's a difficult question, but in terms of leaders in the innovation space, are there particular pharma companies that jump out at you? GSK, maybe, would you? I don't know. Are there a couple of companies you just go, yeah, those guys are doing well? It's difficult to answer that question, isn't it?
Actually, we discussed this on a podcast a few years ago. It's quite hard to pick because there's little pockets happening everywhere.
Yeah. No, we're going to run ourselves down a rabbit hole there.
I think there's definitely like GSK, what they're doing with, quite boring stuff of just like having consistent websites, having chatbots on those websites, having sort of live people to respond. They're not sexy and exciting, and that comes back to what are the most successful digital initiatives. They're often not. It could be an amazing sort of app that just does something very simple but very well, but it's not going to win an award because it's not. It doesn't tell a great story. It's not a really compelling video or something like that. So often it's like a user experience that reduces a certain amount of friction for a patient or for an HCP. But that's part of the problem I think we have with a lot of these digital initiatives is, they often don't have a sort of YouTube video that sits up there for years that everyone looks at. It's a website that comes and goes, or an app that, ends up dropping off the radar at some point. But also, I think we've definitely seen, is it Humira, Faisal?
Yeah, and just
as a lot of drugs become more generic, there's a move from a lot of those companies when they lose their exclusivity. The compulsion to develop digital services for those products is really strong. So suddenly, it's not the drug itself; it's all the services they build around it. So it's almost that when they have to, that's when they really get into the digital side of things, and they start to build those products and services to give themselves some key point of difference.
And it's just doing simple things. A med ed platform for vets for BI, and I think there's something like 26,000 vets in the UK. We signed up all those vets within 3 months because the platform was machine learning. And it learned and personalized the content to the end user. And it was about 5 years ago. So it was obviously before everyone's talking about podcast hype, etc. But all we did was we chatted to vets. We went to vet surgeries, we went to vets when they went out to see horses, etc. And they're always out, and some vets are always out in the car. So we introduced podcasts. This was 5 years ago, and they all loved it. They all listened to podcasts, and they got CPD points for it. So it was just simple. It's just observing, and that was 26,000 vets signed up within 3 months, and I think 45% of them come back on a regular basis. And it's just simple things.
Simple but effective, and it's sort of and there's a part in there which is about asking or finding out what your audience wants and then delivering it the way they want, rather than the shiny new tool that someone's just come in and talked to you about.
I think the biggest problem we have as well is the friction, which Tim mentioned, is reducing friction. So for example, one of the key things Jeff Bezos says is, how do we reduce friction? How do we make it easier for the customer? And I've sat in so many meetings where we've added so many links, so much content for no reason. And we've created more friction. That's the problem. I think it's just reducing and making it frictionless as much as possible.
So sorry, go on, Tim.
Sorry, just talking about Amazon, having a look at what they're doing in the States in terms of their 1 billion acquisition of Pillpack, in terms of packaging all your treatments in a very user-friendly pill format. I think coming back to that digital initiatives, that's definitely one of the most impressive ones. And that's why Amazon paid $1 billion for them.
Yeah. And they paid $1 billion after, I think they launched for 2 years, less than 2 years, from startup to $1 billion. And it was just, everyone should Google it, just watch the video Pillpack, and it's amazing what they've done.
Just picking up on a quote, I think Rebecca's come in. There's a couple of questions which might go in this direction. So, and again, difficult to give a very specific answer to, but this is the sort of thing that I'm interested today in talking about. Rebecca's saying we speak to companies a lot who want to build a community, and I hear people talking about building community all the time, but they expect to do it with a closed corporate mindset to communications. How do we change this mindset? And again, this comes back to, I mean, I know you guys go into companies and you talk about this, and you know what you know, but the people are there. It's the people that are causing problems, isn't it? There's a corporate mindset. You want to build a community, which is a very different way of doing things. Can you talk to that a little bit more about what happens when you go into a group of people, and how do you change the mindset in that?
I mean, it's really difficult because as an industry, we are massively constricted, and there's lots of regulations that stop us having open and frank conversations with our customers. And even with, you know, a client, you know, a FMCG client or someone like Unilever, they're very focused on this, and they have nothing like the issues that we face as an industry. But I think for me, it starts with building the internal community in the business. So you just get people talking internally, cross-functional groups, working together and actually collaborating and just talking to each other. And you start with that. And for me, the marketing and communications should be, if it's done with purpose and values, it should be an outward expression of the internal culture of the business. So the way we communicate with our target audience should reflect the way that we behave and work internally. So I think you start with sort of trying to break down those silos and get those teams working together. And often it's quite hard, and maybe change, and you build some cross-functional teams who can work on some prototype products or something like that. But it's just, you know, what we found in a number of clients is they'll have different departments all basically doing the same things, whether it's medical affairs or marketing or government affairs, public, whoever it happens to be. They're all doing their own little initiatives. And it's just, if they just sat in a room and just put everything up on a wall and agreed a content calendar and an aligned plan of how they were going to work, then you'd get some alignment there. Once you've got that in order, then you can start thinking about how you can use those sort of you know, those techniques of open collaboration and open communication, and start using those with your audience, your target sort of customers as well. And I think, yeah, there's obviously lots of challenges with it, but it's not like they don't have a lot of meetings. There's a lot of events. They get together a lot. These are really good opportunities to break down those barriers. And I think what we obsess with is, how can we build a community with our HCPs, for example, rather than thinking about how can we build a really useful community for HCPs, or how can we help HCPs build a community for themselves. And at that point, you become a facilitator rather than a, communicator. But there's a huge value in that. And then I think that would probably be my first step.
Okay, and just trying to follow that, I think it does follow. Catherine's saying, I see the point about not setting up a digital central team, head of digital, whatever, but how does it work practically? Because surely you need something like in the middle, a center of excellence to lead that innovation and drive it and so on. So rather than everyone just trying to do everything. So I know you said that ultimately it's not great to have that digital person there,
yeah.
But there is a facilitation, a catalyst, and a leadership type position.
Yeah.
And I suppose if I can, just bring Faisal in, because you specifically said don't have that sort of head of innovation or something like that. I mean, Faisal, you are the head of innovation or whatever it is. Do you feel? Do you see? Do you want to talk around that? I mean, how important is your leadership position, facilitation position? How important is all that, and how much actually are you the problem? Because people then just go, "Oh, Faisal will answer that question, and we don't have to think about it." Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, it's given me grey hairs, because I've never had a digital title until I went into agency side. So all the client side was Amazon, Premier League, Gov, a few other sort of non-agency, so proper clients, looking at tech startups and building that. No one had the title digital. So it has given me grey hairs. You do need someone with the experience within there, but I've always tried to explain it in ABC terms and make it nice and easy for everyone to understand. Because I can't have for example, if you have the account handlers, I can't have a conversation with all the clients on a daily basis. The account handlers have that conversation, and I think the account handlers need that education, that training, and understanding the basics. And this is what I've done at every agency, is try to get them to understand the basics so they can have that conversation. And it's important for them to have that conversation rather than just one single person. In my last job, I had 5 different roles.
Right.
So it's honestly, it's hard to do. It has given me grey hairs, but you do need to train everyone up on it. Yeah.
Okay, go on, Tim.
So just to Catherine's point, yes, of course, like you will need the right experts. So you can't always build everything internally. But I've seen so many clients build these centers of excellence, global hubs and things like that. And it feels like it works for a bit and then it sort of just dissolves, or, they should be. I'm working with a number of them, some of them in pharma at the moment, and they've got these center of excellence. And yet they're still getting us in to run these big transformation and training programs. And when I contact them and say, where's, what have you got? Where's the frameworks? They don't have a lot of this information. And I think so I think you get the people in, you have built-in obsolescence for the teams, and you say you're here on a sort of, your role will have succeeded when you're no longer relevant and you're not needed here, because it's like having a chief electricity officer back in the 1920s or something. You need it for a bit. You need to make sure you've got power and you've moved from steam to whatever it happens to be. But hopefully my view is these things, digital will become invisible at some point. We're very clear not to talk about digital communications or digital marketing. We talk about marketing in a digital world or communicating in a digital world. It's not about a separate thing. It's about doing it in a more holistic fashion.
Okay. I have got one eye on the clock, and we are really slightly over what I'd want to do with the recording. So just to wrap it up, if I can, if I can just throw this one at you, because a couple of people have said this. What's a current? I can't remember how they phrased it, but what's a current technology that's at that first initial stage of excitement that you think will actually get through and plateau, that we might not know about, or that you're particularly excited about, just to give them something to go and look at as something that's new and exciting, but might get through the curve. Anything off the top of your head?
I don't get really excited about the new stuff.
Anyway, okay.
I like it. Like all my clients are obsessed with robot process automation, which is automating people and replacing them with software and bots and robots and things like that. Obviously, AI is really important, and it's less the technology and it's more how we use it. So I don't think there's any that are particularly you know, Faisal, what do you think in terms of
Okay,
things
Faisal, I mean,
super
just
relevant
quickly, if
at
you've
the
got
moment?
something.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still at the first steps of machine learning, even that AI and machine learning has been happening for 20 plus years. The most exciting thing I think we should look at, and everyone should look into, is voice, because obviously voice will help patients a lot more, patients with disabilities, patients who find it hard to type, to type into phones or into laptops, etc. Utilize voice to help the patients and doctors as well. We experimented in putting Alexas into vet surgeries, and it worked because their hands are full. so maybe it will work for HCPs as well. But voice for patients is amazing. I think we should all.
Okay, look, we are slightly over, so I do want to draw a halt to that. So for the purpose of this recording and those of you watching, I'm going to draw a line to this. I'm going to say a huge thanks to Faisal and to Tim, both of whom will be very happy to hear from you on LinkedIn if you want to reach out via LinkedIn, or you've got their contact details, or you were shown their contact details. I'll confirm it to you later. But you can find them on LinkedIn very, very easily. If you are interested in these webinars, obviously come back. MedCommsNetworking.com will give you the dates and the topics of what we're doing in the future. If you miss any webinars, they're all on NetworkPharma TV, if nowhere else. But on NetworkPharma TV, you'll find more than 200 videos now, which is becoming quite a useful collection of content. So for those of you online at the moment, don't all rush away. We're happy to carry on talking to the end of the hour, but I would just like to call a halt to the recording. And I'm just going to do what I always do now and ask both Faisal and Tim, and I'll do the same, is to give you a wave goodbye as I close the recording down. So bye-bye. Have a good day.